on avarice. Our third struggle is against the demon of avarice, a demon clearly foreign to our nature, who only gains entry into a monk because he is lacking in faith. The other passions, such as anger and desire, seem to be occasioned by the body and in some sense implanted in us at birth. Hence they are conquered only after a long time. The sickness of avarice, on the contrary, can with diligence and attention be cut off more readily because it enters from outside. If neglected, however, it becomes even harder to get rid of and more destructive than the other passions, for according to the Apostle, it is the root of all evil. Let us look at it in this fashion. Movement occurs in the sexual organs not only of young children who cannot yet distinguish between good and evil, but also the smallest infants still at their mother's breasts. The latter, although quite ignorant of sensual pleasure, nevertheless manifest such natural movements in the flesh. Similarly, the insensitive power exists in infants, as we can see when they are roused against anyone hurting them. I say this not to accuse nature of being the cause of sin, heaven forbid, but to show that the insensitive power and desire, even if planted in man by the Creator for good purpose, appear to change through neglect, from being natural in the body into something that is unnatural. Movement in the sexual organs was given to us by the Creator for procreation and the continuation of the species, not for unchastity, while insensitive power was implanted in us for our salvation, so that we could manifest it against wickedness, but not so that we would act like wild beasts towards our fellow men. Even if we make bad use of these passions, nature itself is not therefore sinful, nor should we blame the Creator. A man who gives someone a knife for some necessary and useful purpose is not to blame if that person uses it to commit murder. This has been said to make it clear that avarice is a passion deriving not from our nature, but solely from an evil and perverted use of our free will. When this sickness finds the soul lukewarm and lacking in faith at the start of the ascetic path, it suggests to us various apparently justifiable and sensible reasons for keeping back something of what we possess. It conjures up in a monk's mind a picture of lengthy old age and bodily illness, and it persuades him that the necessities of life provided by the monastery are insufficient to sustain a healthy man, much less an ill one, that in the monastery the sick, instead of receiving proper attention, are hardly cared for at all, and that unless he has some money tucked away, he will die a miserable death. Finally, it convinces him that he will not be able to remain long in the monastery because of the load of his work and the strictness of the abbot. When with thoughts like these, it has seduced his mind with the ideal of concealing any sum, however trifling, it persuades him to learn, unknown to the abbot, some handicraft through which he can increase his cherished hoardings. Then it deceives the wretched monk with secret expectations, making him imagine what he will earn from his handiwork and the comfort and security which will result from it. Now completely given over to the thought of gain, he notices nothing of the evil passions which attack him, his raging fury when he happens to sustain a loss, his gloom and dejection when he falls short of the gain he hoped for. Just as for other people the belly is a god, so for him is money. That is why the Apostle, knowing this, calls avarice not only the root of all evil, but idolatry as well. How is it that this sickness can so pervert a man that he ends up as an idolater? It is because he now fixes his intellect on love, not of God, but of the images of men stamped on gold. A monk darkened by such thoughts and launched on a downward path can no longer be obedient. He is irritable and resentful and grumbles about every task. He answers back, and having lost his sense of respect, behaves like a stubborn, uncontrollable horse. He is not satisfied with the day's ration of food, complains that he cannot put up with such conditions forever. Neither God's grace, he says, nor the possibility of his own salvation is confined to the monastery, and concludes he will perish if he does not believe it. So, he is so excited and encouraged in these perverse thoughts by his secret hoardings that he even plans to quit the monastery. Then he replies proudly and harshly, no matter what he is told to do, and pays no heed if he sees something in the monastery that needs to be set right, considering himself a stranger, an outsider, and finding fault with all that takes place. Then he seeks excuses for being angry or injured, so that he will not appear to be leaving the monastery frivolously and without cause. He does not even shrink from trying through gossip and idle talk to seduce someone else into leaving with him, wishing to have an accomplice in this sinful action. Because the avarice monk is so fired with desire for private wealth, he will never be able to live at peace in the monastery or under a rule. When, like a wolf, the demon has snatched him from the fold and separated him from the flock, he makes ready to devour him. He sets him to work day and night in his cell on the very task which he complained of doing at fixed times in the monastery. But the demon does not allow him to keep the regular prayers or norms of fasting or orders of vigil. Having bound him fast in the madness of avarice, he persuades him to devote all his effort to his handicraft. There are three forms of this sickness, all of which are equally condemned by the Holy Scriptures and the teaching of the Fathers. The first induces those who were poor to acquire and save the goods they lacked in the world. The second compels those who have renounced worldly goods by offering them to God to have regrets to seek after them again. The third infects a monk from the start with a lack of faith and order, so preventing his complete detachment from worldly things, producing in him a fear of poverty and distrust in God's providence, and leading him to break the promises he made when he renounced the world. Examples of these three forms of avarice are, as I have said, condemned in Holy Scripture. Gehazi wanted to acquire property which he did not previously possess, and therefore never received the prophetic grace which his teacher had wished to leave him in the place of an inheritance. Because of the prophet's curse, he inherited incurable leprosy instead of a blessing. And Judas, who wished to acquire money, which he had previously abandoned on following Christ, not only lapsed so far as to betray the Master and lose his place in the circle of the apostles, he also put an end to his life in the flesh through a violent death. Thirdly, Ananias and Sapphira were condemned to death by the apostles' word when they kept back something of what they had acquired. Again, in Deuteronomy, Moses, in directing, exhorting those who promised to renounce the world and who then retain their earthly possessions because of the fear that comes from the lack of faith, when he says, "What man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? He shall not go out to battle. Let him return to his home, lest his brethren's heart faint as well as his heart." Would anything be clearer or more certain than this testimony? Should not we who have left the world learn from these examples to renounce it completely, and in this state go forth to do battle? We should not turn others from the perfection taught in the Gospels and make them cowardly because of our own hesitant and feeble start. Some, impelled by their own deceit and avarice, distort the meaning of scriptural statement, "It is more blessed to give than to receive." They do the same with the Lord's words when he says, "If you want to be perfect, go and sell all you have and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven, and come and follow me." They judge that it is more blessed to have control over one's personal wealth and to give from this to those in need than to possess nothing at all. They should know, however, that they have not yet renounced the world or achieved monastic perfection so long as they are ashamed to accept Christ's sake of poverty and of the apostle, and to provide for themselves and the needy through the labor of their hands. For only in this way will they fulfill the monastic profession and be glorified with the apostle. Having distributed their former wealth, let them fight the good fight with Paul in hunger and thirst, in cold and nakedness. Had the apostle thought that the possession of one's former wealth was more necessary for perfection, he would not have despised his official status as a Roman citizen, nor would those in Jerusalem have sold their houses and fields and given the money they got from them to the apostles. Had they felt that the apostles considered it more blessed to live off one's possession than from one's labor and the offerings of the Gentiles. The apostle gives us a clear lesson in this matter when he writes to the Romans in the passage beginning, "But now I go to Jerusalem to minister to the saints," and ending, "They were pleased to do it, and indeed they are in debt to them." He himself was often in chains in prison or in fatiguing travel, and so was usually prevented from providing for himself with his own hands. He tells us that he accepted the necessities of life from the brethren who came to him from Macedonia. And writing to the Philippians, he said, "Now you Philippians know also that when I departed from Macedonia, no church except you helped me with gifts of money. For even in Thessalonica you sent me help, not once but twice. Are then the avarice right, and are these men more blessed than the apostle himself, because they satisfied his wants from their own resources? Surely no one would be so foolish as to say this. If we want to follow the gospel commandment and the practice of the whole church, as it is founded initially upon the apostles, we should not follow our own notions or give wrong meanings to things rightly said. We must discard faint-hearted, faithless opinion and recover the strictness of the gospel. In this way, we shall be able to follow also in the footsteps of the fathers, adhering to the discipline of Zenobitic life and truly renouncing this world. It is good here to recall the words of St. Basil, Bishop of Caesarea in Cappadocia. He is reported once to have said to a senator who had renounced the world in a half-hearted manner and was keeping back some of his personal fortune, "You have lost the senator and failed to become a monk." We should therefore make every effort to cut out from our souls this root of all evils, avarice, in the certain knowledge that if the root remains, the branches will sprout freely. This uprooting is difficult to achieve unless you are living in a monastery, for as a monastery we cease to worry about even our most basic needs. With the fate of Ananias and Sapphira in mind, we should shudder at the thought of keeping to ourselves anything of our former possessions. Similarly, frightened by the example of Gehazi, who was afflicted with incurable leprosy because of his avarice, let us guard against piling up money which we did not have while in the world. Finally, recalling Jesus' death by hanging, let us beware of acquiring again any of the things which we have already renounced. In all this we should remember how uncertain is the hour of our death, so that our Lord does not come unexpectedly, and finding our conscience soiled with avarice, say to us what God says to the rich man in the gospel, "You fool, this night your soul will be required of you. Who then will be the owner of what you have stored up?"